Welcome to Universe of Love and Anime, where love stories are told with all your heart. Before we begin our emotional journey today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who needs a story that is healing, hopeful, and humane. Each of your support not only motivates us, but also spreads love to more people. Thank you for choosing to stop by Universe of Love and Anime, and now, let's listen to this heart-touching story. Growing Heart. After Benjamin and I were reborn, we didn't speak a word about our past. We simply looked the other way. Perhaps it was shame, perhaps fear of repeating our mistakes, or maybe we understood that trying to fix the past might only make it worse. In this second life, he made a different choice. He followed Emma, the class belle, to a university in a bustling city, leaving behind the quiet streets of our hometown and the memories we had built over years. I stayed back, this time deciding not to chase after someone who had already let go of me once. Armed with the painful clarity of hindsight, I used the knowledge from my past life to quietly reshape my present. While he pursued a path of ambition and recognition, I took a quieter road, returning to my childhood home, where my mother still lived after my father's untimely death. I didn't have glamour, but I had peace. I opened a modest bookstore cafe on the street where I used to wait for Benjamin after school, and day by day, I rebuilt a version of myself that no longer depended on his validation. Meanwhile, Benjamin soared in the public eye. He became a name in the financial world, married Emma in a lavish ceremony that trended online for days, and lived a life curated for envy. But the truth is, no matter how many headlines they made, no one could rewrite what truly happened between us. 10 years later, we met again at our class reunion. The moment I walked into the private dining room, the conversations halted. All eyes turned. I was 7 months pregnant, wearing a simple linen dress that barely concealed the curve of my belly. My hair was tied back in a loose knot, my makeup minimal. I wasn't there to impress. I was there because I no longer had anything to prove. Benjamin was seated at the center, his arm around Emma, who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. He stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face before it turned into a familiar smirk. "Is this what you've become?" he said, not loud but loud enough. "After all these years?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, the door opened again. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside, placed a gentle hand on my back, and smiled at the room. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing my temple. "My wife is pregnant. I'd appreciate it if we didn't smoke indoors." Benjamin's fingers twitched around his cigar, and for the first time in a decade, he looked unsettled. As the evening continued, conversations flowed. Old friends caught up, but Benjamin kept stealing glances. I avoided his gaze. I had no intention of reopening wounds that had already scarred over. Later, as I made my way to the restroom, I found him waiting in the hallway, just like he used to wait for me back in college whenever we fought. "You really went back," he said. "You really chose that life." His voice wasn't angry. It was something else, resentment laced with longing. "That life saved me," I said quietly.
"And you chose your."
He shook his head, pulling a small box from his pocket and flipping it open. A ring shimmered inside, large and cold. "I bought this for you. Back then. If things had gone differently, it's smaller than mine," I interrupted, gently closing the box. "And I don't mean the diamond." He said nothing. I left him standing there, surrounded by shadows that no amount of money or success could erase. I thought back to our last fight in the previous life, on a highway slick with rain and grief. I was pregnant, exhausted, desperate to return home to be with my mother after my father's sudden death. Benjamin had refused. "There's no future in that town," he'd said. "You want our child to be stuck in a place where no one dreams." "I want our child to have a home," I had pleaded. But he saw my love for simplicity as failure, my loyalty as small-mindedness. That was when I knew. He had stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as the weight holding him back. The accident that ended our lives came days later. And when we woke again, standing on the brink of university applications, I watched him choose Emma without hesitation. He never looked back. I didn't stop him. And for a long time I thought that meant I had lost. But now, standing beside a man who loved me without conditions, feeling the soft kicks of life beneath my skin, I realized something. I had never truly been lost. I had simply been walking a different road. When I returned to the table, my husband handed me a warm cup of ginger tea and whispered that he had reserved a room upstairs so I could rest if needed. Emma came over moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Congratulations," she said with a tight smile. "I suppose everything worked out for you in the end." I nodded.
It did.
"And I hope it did for you too." "Benjamin's changed," she said, almost as if defending him to herself. "He's grown." "We all grow," I said gently. "But it depends in what direction." She seemed to ponder that before walking away. I watched her sit beside Benjamin, who barely spoke for the rest of the evening. He looked tired. Not physically, but soul-deep tired, the kind of weariness that comes when you reach everything you ever wanted only to realize it doesn't fill the emptiness. As the night ended and we made our way out, Benjamin held the door open. For a moment, we stood face to face again. "You look happy," he said, almost inaudibly. "I am. Do you ever think about what might have been?" I smiled, not in cruelty, but in peace. "Every now and then. But then I remember what is." He nodded, and I knew this was our final goodbye, the last unspoken closure. I walked into the night holding my husband's hand, leaving behind the boy I once loved and the man he had become. The past life had ended in heartbreak. But this one, I had written for myself. Isabella left the restaurant with a calm exterior, but a storm inside her chest. The tension hadn't faded. It had only been redirected inward, knotting her breath with the residue of too many things left unsaid and far too many things said the wrong way. The streets outside were quieter than her thoughts, and every step felt like she was pulling herself out of a deep, sticky pool of humiliation and unwanted attention. The encounter with Benjamin and Emma replayed in her mind in loops, Emma's haughty face twisting with disbelief as the money transfer went through, Benjamin's cold tone, the fake sympathy from classmates who had only ever seen her as a whisper from the past. But what stung the most wasn't the confrontation itself. It was the feeling of being seen as small, as pitiful, even though she had already outgrown that identity long ago. Christopher didn't speak when she slid into the passenger seat. He simply glanced at her, made sure she was breathing evenly, and placed a warm thermos of ginger tea into her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words she managed since leaving. He only nodded, his presence steady as a lighthouse in the dark. The drive home was silent, but not empty. It was filled with things only they understood: grace, pain, the quiet victory of restraint. Back at home, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. The baby kicked gently as if to remind her that her body now housed 2 heartbeats, not just one. She placed a hand on her belly and closed her eyes, exhaling. The next day, social media exploded. Someone had recorded a portion of the reunion and posted it anonymously, a blurry video of her standing opposite Emma, transferring the money, followed by a brief clip of her final words to the room. The title was sensational: Class Belle humiliated by pregnant ex? The real story behind the viral moment. Comments flooded in, people taking sides. Some mocked her, saying she was pathetic for throwing money just to save face. Others cheered her on, calling her classy, brave, a woman who didn't take disrespect sitting down. But Isabella didn't read the comments. She had someone filter them. She wasn't interested in public opinion. She had fought her battle not for the world, but for herself. What did interest her was the ripple effect. Old acquaintances reached out, some to offer apologies, others to gossip. She ignored most of them. She did, however, respond to one message, a quiet thank you from a classmate named Lily, who admitted that watching Isabella speak up had helped her walk away from a toxic relationship. That message mattered. At her bookstore, business picked up strangely. People dropped by pretending to browse, secretly hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman from the video. Some customers asked nosy questions. She deflected gently. Others shared their admiration. She nodded politely. But the real comfort came from her daily rhythm tea in the morning, sorting new arrivals, talking with her assistant, curating a shelf of books on self-worth. One day, she curated a new window display called Turning Points and filled it with titles about courage, loss, boundaries, and growth. That night, she and Christopher sat on the porch. She told him about the messages, the looks, the pressure. "I didn't expect to become a symbol," she said. "You're not a symbol," he replied. "You're a person who drew a line. That's always going to be misunderstood by people who live without lines." She leaned on his shoulder. "Do you think Benjamin understood anything?" "Maybe. But that's not your burden anymore." A few days later, Benjamin sent flowers. White roses, a card tucked inside.
"I'm sorry."
"You didn't deserve that. Thank you for everything." Isabella didn't reply. She placed the roses in a vase in the restroom. She didn't hate him. She just no longer felt responsible for him. Weeks passed. The video faded. The gossip moved on. But Isabella grew stronger. She began writing again, this time not just memoir, but a novella story about a woman who rewrote her life after everyone thought it was over. She poured herself into it, page by page. And then one afternoon, she received a call. Her publisher wanted to buy it. "It's raw, it's healing, it's powerful," they said.
She cried.
Not because of the deal, but because the girl who once stood on a rainy highway begging Benjamin to go home had now created a world where she didn't need permission to feel worthy. Her mother, when she came to visit, brought a hand-woven baby blanket. "You've done well," she said, rubbing Isabella's shoulder. "Your father would be proud." The baby kicked again. Isabella smiled. Her due date was close. One morning, she stood before the mirror, touching her stomach and whispering, "You're coming into a world your mother fought hard to shape." On the day of her baby shower, people gathered not because of the past, but because they believed in her future. Friends from the bookstore, old university peers, even the girl Lily, who brought her a handwritten card. Emma was not mentioned. Benjamin wasn't invited. That chapter was closed. And when she gave birth a few weeks later, Christopher was by her side, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering strength into her ear. When the baby finally came, a healthy little boy with a loud cry and strong grip, Isabella didn't weep from pain, but from knowing that she had done it. She had carried life through judgment, insult, doubt, and still arrived at joy. In the quiet moments after, when everyone had gone and only her small family remained, she held her son close and whispered, "Your mother is not perfect, but she is brave. And she'll make sure you never grow up thinking silence equals strength." Christopher leaned in and said, "Welcome to the world, little one. You've already inherited your mother's fire." The baby yawned, and the world shifted again. Emma gritted her teeth so tightly her jaw trembled as she tried to suppress the fury rising in her chest. But the room was already quiet, and everyone had seen it. Christopher had transferred the full amount without hesitation, and that gesture, more than the money itself, had shattered the narrative she tried so hard to control. Isabella remained composed, her hand resting lightly on her belly, her eyes steady, not triumphant, not mocking, just resolute. Benjamin looked down at his phone again, as if hoping the transfer notification might somehow disappear, but it didn't. The money was there. Tangible. Real.
Public.
He opened his mouth slightly, but couldn't speak. For someone so used to holding power over Isabella, the reversal was disorienting. Christopher slipped his phone into his pocket and turned toward the room. "Now that this matter is resolved," he said calmly, "I believe my wife deserves an apology." That word wife hit the room like a lightning bolt. Murmurs erupted. Emma blinked, stunned. "Wife," someone whispered. "They're married?" Christopher's voice didn't waver.
"Yes.
"We've been registered for some time. We just didn't announce it publicly." Emma turned pale. Benjamin's shoulders tensed. Even the class monitor, who had tried so hard to keep the peace, suddenly looked very interested in the floor tiles. "Christopher," Emma began, her voice suddenly soft, I didn't mean anything personal. It was about the money, the dress, the bag. Christopher looked at her, not coldly but firmly. You tried to humiliate my wife. That wasn't about money. That was about pride. Emma's lips quivered as she tried to salvage her image. I didn't know you were together. She never said anything. She doesn't need to announce her life for your benefit, he replied. And even if we weren't together, what you did was still unacceptable. The silence was deafening. Then, surprisingly, someone near the back of the room coughed and said, "He's right." Heads turned. It was one of the quieter classmates, a woman named Sarah, who hadn't said a word all evening. "Emma, you were out of line. We all saw it." She said she didn't want the drink. "You pushed it. You escalated it. And then you turned it into a circus." A few others nodded. One even added, "Honestly, this reunion was supposed to be about reconnecting, not bullying." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Maybe they were genuine. Maybe they were performative. It didn't matter. She grabbed her bag still damp and turned away, muttering something about needing to fix her makeup. Benjamin stood still. Christopher looked at him. "Anything you want to say?" Benjamin looked up, meeting Isabella's gaze. There was a flicker, there's something almost like apology, but then it was gone. "No," he said simply. "Of course not," Isabella replied. "That's the most consistent thing about you." She took Christopher's hand, and they turned toward the exit. As they walked away, the crowd slowly began to murmur again, not as loudly as before, and not with the same amused tone. This time, it was reflective.
Questioning.
Maybe even ashamed. Outside, the evening air felt lighter. Isabella took a deep breath. "I was afraid he wouldn't come in time," she admitted. "I would have come even if I had to walk here," Christopher said. "But I was never going to let you face them alone." "I wasn't alone," she said softly, looking down at her belly. "But thank you for making it easier." The car ride was peaceful. No one said much, and they didn't need to. Back at home, Isabella changed into something comfortable and sat on the edge of the bed. Christopher brought her a warm glass of milk. "Tomorrow people will talk," she said. "They already are," he replied. "Let them. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she whispered. "But it still feels heavy." "Because you've carried it for too long," he said gently. "Tonight wasn't just about them. It was about you letting go." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, thinking about all the years she'd spent trying to be small so others could feel big. The years she'd thought being quiet meant being kind. But now, with every beat of her heart, with every gentle kick from within her, she knew silence was not always noble. Sometimes, speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is the bravest thing you can do. The next morning, social media was ablaze. Someone had recorded Christopher's entrance, his declaration, the transfer, the reaction. The video had already been edited with captions and dramatic music. The comments ranged from applause to analysis to speculation. But Isabella didn't open the app. Instead, she took a walk. She passed by the park where she and Benjamin used to argue under the pretense of talking things through. She walked by the cafe where Emma had once sat with her, pretending to be a friend. She walked until her feet hurt and her heart no longer did. At noon, she returned to her bookstore. Her assistant gave her a tight hug and said, "You were amazing." Isabella smiled. "I was just tired." "Well, whatever it was," her assistant said, "it inspired people." By evening, the bookstore had a small crowd. Some came to buy books. Others just to see her. A reporter called asking for an interview. She declined. Her story wasn't for headlines. It was for her child. Later that night, Christopher wrapped his arms around her and said, "Do you know how proud I am of you?" She looked at him and replied, "Do you know how long it took me to be proud of myself?" They held each other in silence. And in that silence, everything changed. No more fear. No more pretending. Just two people choosing each other, over and over again. And that, Isabella thought, was worth more than any revenge, any apology, or any viral moment ever could be. Benjamin didn't speak for a few seconds after I answered. He signaled the waiter to bring a glass of water for me and a black coffee for himself. I looked around the cafe. It hadn't changed much. Same vintage shelves, same mismatched chairs, and the same quiet corner where we once argued over our future. Back then, I cried silently into my tea while he lectured me about ambition. Now I just wanted this conversation to end before it even began. "You came," he finally said, leaning back, acting casual, but I could see his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. "You asked me to," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "What do you want?" He tilted his head and smiled faintly, as if amused. "Isabella, we've known each other for so long. Don't you think this tension between us is a little unnecessary?" "There's no tension, Benjamin. Just distance. And it's exactly how I prefer it."
He ignored that.
"I've been thinking a lot since the reunion," he said. "Seeing you again. It reminded me of the time we spent together. Of who we used to be." "Used to be," I repeated, emphasizing the past. "You seem happy," he said, studying my face. "Is it real?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because I remember you," he said, voice quieter. "I know when you're pretending." "I'm not pretending, Benjamin. That was back when I still needed your approval. I don't anymore." He sighed and leaned forward, hands clasped. "I shouldn't have embarrassed you that night. That wasn't my intention. You've always been good at rewriting history," I said. "You stood there while Emma accused me of things I didn't do. You mocked me. In front of everyone. That wasn't a mistake, it was who you are." "And who are you now?" he asked. "Someone who lets her husband fight her battles?" I smiled. "No. Someone who finally married a man who doesn't think love is a power struggle." He looked like he wanted to say something biting, but held it back. The silence stretched. The waiter brought our drinks. I took a small sip of water. Benjamin stared into his coffee, like it held some answer he couldn't find. "You know," he said eventually, "Emma's been quiet since that night. She hasn't spoken much. I think she saw something in us that day that scared her." "In us," I repeated. "There is no us, Benjamin. There hasn't been for a long time." "I know," he said quickly. "I know that. But I still remember what we had. And seeing you happy, it's strange. It's like I thought I wanted you to suffer without me. But when I saw you thriving, I felt disoriented." I offered. "Like the story didn't go the way you wrote it in your head?" "Yes," he admitted, surprisingly honest. "I thought you'd regret choosing to stay behind. I thought you'd be stuck." "You don't know how often I thought the same about myself," I said. "But I realized something you never did. Success means nothing if you have to kill parts of yourself to achieve it." He looked up sharply. "Is that what you think I did?" "No," I said. "That's what I know you did. You wanted the city, the money, the image. You got it. But you lost your soul in the process. And now you're trying to measure my happiness using your scale. That's why you can't understand it." He flinched. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time with you." He sat back, defeated. "Then why did you come today?" "Because I wanted to say it to your face. So we can both move on. For real. You don't owe me anything. And I don't owe you closure." He nodded slowly. "So that's it." "That's it," I said, standing up. He looked like he wanted to reach out, but stopped himself. "Take care of yourself, Benjamin." "Isabella," he said quickly, almost desperately. "Was there ever a version of us that could have worked?" I paused, turned slightly. "Maybe. In another life. But not this one." I walked out without looking back. Outside, the air was cold, the sky gray. But I felt light. Like I had finally dropped a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. Christopher was waiting nearby in the car, reading something on his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Everything okay?" "Everything's finished," I said. He opened the door, helped me in, and took my hand as we drove home. That night, as I lay beside him, I thought about the question Benjamin asked. A version of us that might have worked. But even in my dreams, I couldn't see it. Because no matter how many times you try to reframe the past, it never changes what actually happened. And in truth, I didn't want it to change. I needed that pain to become the woman I am now. A week passed.
No calls.
No messages. Just peace. Until one morning, I received a letter. Handwritten.
No sender.
But I knew the handwriting. Benjamin's. It read, Isabella. I used to think regret was weakness. Now I think it's the only honest feeling I have left. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just understanding. I'm sorry. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I never opened. Not out of hate, but because some pages don't need rereading. They just need to be closed. And I had written my final line long ago, Benjamin. You are crazy. I finally couldn't contain myself. My voice, though still calm, cut through the air like a blade. He blinked, startled, as if it was me who had said something outrageous. You want me to get rid of the child I'm carrying me child just so you can rewind your ego to 10 years ago? He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. Don't. Just don't. I came here thinking you wanted closure, or maybe just to clear the air. But what you want is something else entirely. You want to rewrite the past, Benjamin, but this isn't your story anymore. The look on his face shifted from arrogance to disbelief. I'm offering you a chance, he said quietly, like he was the reasonable one. A chance to do what? I asked. To erase everything I've lived through in the past decade? To pretend the pain, the growth, the healing didn't happen? You haven't changed, Benjamin. You just got older. He clenched his jaw, his fingers drumming against the table. Isabella, you don't understand. I've made mistakes. I admit that. But I know better now. We could be great together like before. I shook my head slowly. No, not like before. Because even then, we weren't great. We were surviving. We were pretending. I bent myself into shapes you approved of. I traded my voice for peace and my dreams for your praise. And now you think I'll do that again, even if it means sacrificing my child. My voice broke slightly, but I didn't look away. You must think I'm still the girl who stood by the highway crying after our last fight. But I'm not. That girl's gone. She grew up. She found herself. And she found someone who values her enough not to ask her to choose between love and dignity. Benjamin leaned back, face flushed. So, that's it? You choose him over me? No, I said. I chose me over you a long time ago. Christopher just happened to be someone who saw me clearly once I did. There was a silence between us, heavy and undeniable. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I stared at it, stunned. Are you serious? I asked. What even is this? A ring, he said. I bought it years ago. I never gave it to you, because I thought you'd leave. And you did. But I kept it, thinking maybe one day you could guilt me into starting over. I finished for him. Benjamin, you really don't understand the first thing about me anymore. I pushed the box back across the table. Take it. Give it to someone who's willing to shrink for you. His face hardened, and for the first time, I saw not a man trying to make peace, but someone who truly couldn't handle not being in control. You think you're better than me now? No, I said softly. I think I've finally stopped trying to be less than you. He stood up abruptly, the chair screeching behind him. This conversation is over. It was over the moment you asked me to erase my child, I said, also rising. Goodbye, Benjamin. I hope someday you understand what love actually is. I walked out of the cafe without looking back, my hands shaking, but my steps steady. Outside, the wind was brisk. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold fill my lungs and clear my mind. It wasn't just the end of a conversation. It was the end of a chapter one hadn't realized was still open. I walked back slowly, replaying the moment he said those words. Not because they hurt, but because they didn't. Not the way they would have. That night, I told Christopher everything. He listened without interrupting, without questioning, just gently rubbing my back as I sat on the couch, my hands curled around a warm cup of tea. When I finished, he kissed my forehead. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing yourself. And for choosing us. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. He really thought I would say yes. He never saw who you really are, Christopher said. He only ever saw the version of you that fit his story. A few days later, Benjamin sent a message. Just one line. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't reply. Not out of hate, but because some apologies don't need responses. They're acknowledgments for the sender, not the receiver. I opened the message once, read it twice, and deleted it. My child kicked inside me, a quiet reminder that I was no longer living for someone else's approval. I was building something new, stronger.
For me. For us.
The next week, I went to visit my mother. She greeted me at the door, eyes warm, and took my hand. You look lighter, she said. Like you've left something heavy behind. I did, I replied. Someone who once thought he owned my future. And now I write my own. That evening, I watched the sun set from my porch, feeling the child roll gently beneath my skin. I thought about all the versions of myself that had led to this one: the girl who fell in love too fast, the woman who stayed too long, the soul who finally said enough. And for the first time, I felt proud of all of them, because every one of those selves had brought me here. And here was good. Here was home that I didn't make fun of Benjamin for his arrogance. I didn't even feel anger anymore. What I felt was exhaustion, the kind that comes from dealing with someone who refuses to accept reality. I stared at the bouquet in his hands, those vibrant flowers that meant nothing to me. Benjamin, I said calmly, you are not listening. You never have. You talk, you assume, you declare, but you never listen. His lips parted, but I raised a hand. Let me finish. You say I only settled for Christopher because you left. That everything good in my life now is a result of your absence, as if my happiness is a reaction to you. But you're wrong. My happiness exists entirely separate from you. You were gone, yes. But I didn't build a good life out of bitterness. I built it out of clarity. Isabella, just admit that you still have feelings. I don't, I said sharply. And the more you say that, the more you disrespect the life I've worked so hard to create. His shoulders stiffened. So, Christopher is better than me? I shook my head. This isn't a contest. He doesn't have to be better than you.
He just has to be right for me.
And he is. You don't love me at all anymore? He asked quietly. There was a crack in his voice that might have once softened me, but not anymore. I haven't loved you in a very long time, Benjamin. You might have been the first person I loved, but that love didn't grow with me. It held me back. I spent years trying to mold myself into someone you'd approve of. Someone who didn't ask for too much. Someone who waited for you to come around. And then I realized if I had to wait for love, then it wasn't the kind I wanted. Benjamin looked away. His hands tightened around the bouquet. You were always stubborn, he said, his voice low. You're confusing stubbornness with knowing my worth. You think this life you're living is perfect? He asked bitterly. You think Christopher is flawless? That he'll never hurt you? Never fail you? No, I said. I know he's not perfect. But he never made me feel like I had to be less for him to stay. That's the difference. He let out a short, bitter laugh. So that's it? All these years, and you're just going to walk away again? Again? I echoed. I never walked away, Benjamin. You did. You walked into another city, into another life, and left me behind without even looking back. You made your choice. I just learned how to live with it. And now, you're angry that I lived well. He took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back. Don't, I warned. Don't come any closer. I don't want you in my space. I don't want you in my life. I thought we were done after the cafe, but I was wrong. I need to make it even clearer now. You are not welcome in my world anymore. His jaw clenched. What about the child? What about him? I asked. Do you think I'm going to let you poison his life the way you tried to poison mine? I'm not poison. You're a ghost, I replied. One that should have stayed in the past. I gave you closure. You just didn't want to accept it. Then tell me what to do, he said, almost begging. Tell me what I can do to earn a second chance. There is no second chance, I said. And the fact that you think love is something to be earned like a trophy proves that we're still speaking different languages. He stood still for a long time, then finally lowered the bouquet. I really thought you thought I'd fall apart, I finished. But I didn't. And I won't. He turned slowly and walked away, the flowers still in his hand. I didn't call after him. I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. Only finality. And that was enough. I returned to the office, my coworkers pretending not to have seen anything, though their eyes said otherwise. I smiled at them briefly and went straight to my desk. That evening, when Christopher picked me up, he took one look at me and said, "He showed up again." I nodded. But I ended it. This time for real. Do you want to talk about it? No, I said, leaning against his shoulder. I just want to go home. And so we did. That night, as I sat in the nursery, folding tiny clothes and placing them into drawers, I felt something settle inside me. Peace, perhaps. Or maybe the absence of turmoil. Either way, it was welcome. A week passed. Then another. There were no more messages from Benjamin. No more uninvited visits. It seemed he finally understood. One morning, a small package arrived at my door. No note. Inside, the same bouquet of flowers now dried in a small velvet box I recognized instantly. The ring he once offered. I stared at it for a long time, then carefully placed both items in a box and slid it to the back of my closet. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of what I'd survived, of who I'd become. The past, finally buried not in hate, but in truth. That weekend, Christopher and I took a walk by the river. The sun was soft, the wind gentle. He held my hand the entire time. Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently? He asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but not with longing. More with gratitude. I needed everything I went through to understand what I truly deserve. And what do you deserve? He asked. I smiled.
Peace.
Safety. Love without conditions. He stopped walking, turned to face me, and said, "You have all of that now. And you always will." I leaned into him, feeling our child stir between us. This was the life I chose. Not because someone left me. Not because I settled. But because I finally found the courage to choose myself. And in doing so, I found everything I had ever truly wanted. Benjamin's hand, still holding the ring, slowly lowered as he looked up at me in disbelief. I didn't waver. I didn't flinch. My gaze was steady, calm, even kind in a way that must have cut deeper than anger ever could. There was nothing left for him to take. Nothing left for me to give. I had already mourned our past, grieved what we used to be, and buried the illusions I once clung to. This was just the final shovel of dirt over a grave that had long been empty. Cristobal's presence beside me was quiet but strong, like the earth under my feet. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His warmth radiated toward me like a silent promise. I'm here. I choose you. Not the version of you I want to fix. You. As you are. Benjamin seemed to register him only now. His face twisted slightly, whether from pain or pride. I didn't know anymore. So this is really it? He asked, his voice low, almost hoarse. Yes, I replied gently. It's over. It's been over for a long time. This conversation, this spectacle's only the echo of something that died quietly years ago. He opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. Don't. You don't need to say anything else. We've said enough. We've both lived enough. You made your choices. I made mine. Let's respect them. I turned without waiting for his reaction and walked toward Cristobal, who took my hand as naturally as breathing. His fingers wrapped around mine in a way that steadied me, reminded me that I wasn't alone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. We walked together, away from the office building, away from Benjamin, away from a past that no longer had any power over me. That night, as I sat on the balcony with a warm cup of tea in my hand and Cristobal rubbing my shoulder gently, I thought about how strange life was. How it gave you the same test over and over until you finally passed it, not by changing the test, but by changing yourself. The test was Benjamin. And I had passed. Days passed. Then weeks. Benjamin didn't show up again. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had decided to leave the city after all. Emma had refused to return with him, and his mother's health had taken a turn for the worse. There were no more messages, no more confrontations. Just silence. And I was grateful for it. One afternoon, Cristobal came home early. He kissed me on the forehead and said, "Let's take a walk." We strolled through the park, the spring air crisp and fragrant. Children ran past us, chasing bubbles, their laughter pure and bright. Cristobal placed a hand on my belly, which was now visibly round. "She kicked today," I said, smiling. "Twice." He beamed, eyes filled with a wonder that never felt performative. "She already knows her mom is the strongest woman in the world." I laughed, leaned into him. "You're pretty great too, you know." "I try," he said, and we both fell silent, not from discomfort, but from fullness. Later, as we sat on a bench watching the golden sunset stretch across the sky, I finally voiced something I had been thinking. "Do you ever feel afraid?" "Of what?" "That I'm still carrying baggage from the past. That maybe some part of me still gets affected by Benjamin showing up, even if I don't want him anymore." Cristobal looked at me seriously, then smiled. "Isabella, if you didn't carry your past with you, you wouldn't be the woman I love. It's not baggage. It's experience. It's what taught you to love better, to trust wiser, to walk away when you must." I blinked at him, surprised by the ease of his words. "You're not afraid?" "I'm only afraid of one thing," he said, taking my hand, "that one day you'll stop believing how much you deserve to be happy." I kissed his cheek, feeling tears rise behind my eyes, not from pain but from overwhelming safety. Months later, in the quiet of the delivery room, when our daughter was placed in my arms for the first time, I felt something sacred pass through me. Cristobal was beside me, his eyes red, his hand holding mine. She was small, pink, perfect. We named her Alma,
Soul.
because she was born from everything we had learned, everything we had let go of, and everything we had built. A few days after we returned home, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. No name. Just my name, in handwriting I hadn't seen in a long time. It was from Benjamin. A short note. "Congratulations. I heard you had a daughter. I hope she inherits your strength. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find all the happiness I couldn't give you." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not because I cherished it, but because it marked the end of something. I never replied. There was nothing left to say. My world had moved on. And for the first time in many years, so had my heart. Cristobal held me close that night, and as I rested my head on his shoulder, I finally felt safe. Not just safe from the storms of the past, but from the doubts that used to cloud my heart. I remembered the way he had looked at me in the hospital, how he had reached for my hand with quiet certainty, not demanding anything, just offering his presence. That presence became my anchor. We talked for hours about our dreams, about the kind of life we wanted to build, not perfect, but real. The ring on my finger no longer symbolized fear or compensation, but hope and choice. That night, after the wedding and after reading Benjamin's final words, I stayed up watching Cristobal sleep beside me. His breathing was steady, his arms warm around me, like the universe had finally wrapped me in a comfort I had always longed for. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted me. They whispered still, sometimes, but their voices had no power. Benjamin had been part of my story, and in some strange way, I owed him the depth I now had. But Cristobal was the light. In his arms, I rebuilt a version of myself that wasn't shaped by abandonment or false promises. I had once believed that true love was dramatic, full of tears and longing. But now I knew love could also be steady, unwavering, a quiet force that held you through your worst. The morning after our wedding, the sunlight poured through the window, soft and golden. I looked at our daughter sleeping in her crib, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Cristobal made breakfast while humming an old love song, the scent of warm toast filling the air. It was ordinary, and yet it felt extraordinary. Days turned into weeks, and we began to settle into a rhythm. On weekends, we visited my parents, who adored Cristobal more each time. He listened to my father's endless stories, helped my mother with her garden, and always carried our daughter, without complaint. Every time I looked at them, I knew I had made the right choice. I never replied to Benjamin's letter. I never went down to see if he was truly waiting outside my bridal chamber. It didn't matter. That chapter was closed. If he stood out there under the stars, hoping for a glimpse of who I used to be, he would only see the woman I had become, one who had moved on, one who had healed. Months later, we received an invitation to a reunion. I debated whether to go, but Cristobal gently encouraged me. "Not for them," he said.
For you.
"So you can see how far you've come." I agreed. At the reunion, there were the usual smiles, old jokes, awkward silences. I saw familiar faces, but none held the power they once did. When Benjamin arrived late, alone, I only offered him a polite nod. He didn't approach me. He sat in the corner, quiet. Perhaps he had finally understood. That evening, when Cristobal and I returned home, he took my hand and placed it over his heart. "I know you went through a lot to get here," he whispered, "but I'm grateful every day that you did." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but gratitude. "I'm here because of you," I said, "and because I finally chose myself." Years passed. Our daughter grew up with laughter in her eyes and strength in her bones. She loved stories, and one night she asked, "Mom, did you always love Dad?" I paused, smiled, and said, "I didn't find him first, but I found him when it mattered." She didn't understand then, but one day she would. Love doesn't always arrive in the way we expect. Sometimes it comes after storms, after heartbreaks, after saying goodbye to people we once thought we'd never live without. And when it does come, quietly and sincerely, we have to be brave enough to recognize it and kind enough to hold on to it. As the years passed, Benjamin became a fading memory. I heard through classmates that he never married. Some said he focused on charity work, others that he simply kept to himself. Maybe he changed. Maybe he didn't. I no longer wondered. My life was full. Cristobal and I traveled, raised our daughter, held hands through every joy and sorrow. There were fights, reconciliations, illness, healing. There was life, real, honest, imperfect life. On our 20th anniversary, he surprised me with a quiet dinner under the stars, the same place he first told me he loved me. "Thank you," I whispered.
For what? He asked.
"For seeing me, for staying." He smiled, brushing my cheek. "You were always worth it." And as the stars glittered above us, I realized that love, in its truest form, is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, persistent, and unwavering. It is what remains when everything else fades. It is what finds you when you finally find yourself. Thank you for listening to the touching story of Isabella and Benjamin with Universe of Love and Anime. Love is not always perfect, and sometimes letting go is the bravest way to preserve yourself. Through the journey of rebirth, mistakes, regrets, and finally healing, we learn that true happiness lies not in the lost past, but in the present that we cherish. If this story touches you or reminds you of someone who has passed through your life, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video to spread true emotions to more people. See you in the next videos, where each story is a piece of deep and sincere love.